Kitty are one of Hollywood's most famous on-screen couples, but fans are still upset that they never got to make their relationship official. What really caught people's attention was the clear but subtle tension between Matt Dillon and Miss Kitty, since Miss Kitty's final Gunsmoke for the first time in 1974. It's amazing that fans of the show, both old and new, are still watching and talking about the answers to those questions. You'll be surprised to hear that the answer comes from James Arnesss himself. So let's dig deep and find out what really. Gunsmoke began as a radio show in 1952. When they decided to turn the exciting stories into a TV show, they needed to find someone to protect Dodge City. Luckily, James Arness, who was 32 at the time, seemed to stand out. John Wayne had recommended him for the part, and he beat out a lot of other candidates, including William Conrad, who voiced Marshal Matt Dillon on the radio. At 6 feet 7 inches, James Arness was the perfect height to bring a lot of different stories to life. Since he had been through the struggles of the world himself as a Vietnam veteran, the studio and writers wanted someone tough enough to take on the pain, and that was definitely him. In Gunsmoke, the marshal was shot, beaten, stabbed, and even poisoned. This role was made for James Arness, and he didn't have to change much to play it. Amy Stock, who worked with him on 4 Gunsmoke movies, said how easily the marshal fit into the role. He went from being off-duty to being in action on screen. She remembered the first time she saw him, he was wearing the Dillon hat, coat, and tennis shoes. He was sitting in his chair still wearing his tennis shoes when the filmmakers told him they were ready for him on set. He took off his tennis shoes and put on his cowboy boots, then went straight to his horse and became Matt Dillon. She said he was the perfect fit for the part. When Amanda Blake got the part of Miss Cooper on the Western TV show Gunsmoke, she was in her mid-20s and was very excited. Amanda quickly became fans of James Arness, who played Marshal Matt Dillon. Amanda's performance as Miss Kitty, the owner of the local saloon in Dodge City, was adored by viewers. Her beauty really shone when the show went from black and white to color in the 1966 season, which was about halfway through its run. Gunsmoke premiered in 1955 and ran for 20 seasons, a total of 20 seasons. James Arness has played Matt Dillon on the show for all 20 seasons, while Amanda Blake ended her run as Miss Kitty in the 19th season. The writers didn't go into too much detail about Matt and Miss Kitty's relationship, but it was clear that there was more going on between them. James Arness was born on May 26, 1923, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He started his career as a radio announcer in Minnesota in 1945, and after moving to Los Angeles, he started getting noticed in the movie business. His big break came in 1947, when he got a part next to Loretta Young in The Farmer's Daughter. That same year, he also got parts in a bunch of westerns. In 1951's The Thing, which really helped his career. In the early 1950s, Jim signed a contract with John Wayne's production company, Bat Jack. During his 3 years there, he worked on 4 movies with Wayne. It was John Wayne who gave Jim his big break in 1955, when he cast him as Marshal Matt Dillon in the new TV show Gunsmoke. The story goes that CBS originally wanted Wayne to play the part. He turned down the part when the show was moved from radio to TV, but suggested Jim instead. CBS agreed to give Jim a chance along with 25 other people, including Raymond Burr, after being chosen to play Dillon. Jim wasn't sure about going into television, but he decided to do it anyway. He ended up staying with Gunsmoke for 20 years, earning 3 Emmy nominations until the show was canceled in 1975, making it the longest-running drama series ever. He also starred in 4 Gunsmoke TV movies, with the most recent Gunsmoke Ivory: The Long Ride coming out in 1992. After leaving Gunsmoke, Jim kept looking for roles in TV westerns. From 1976 to 1979, he was in How the West Was Won, which is considered one of the best. There is a miniseries out there, and his last TV show was a police drama called Big Jim Man, which aired in the early 1980s. Before he became famous in Hollywood, James Arnesss had quite the journey as a soldier in the U.S. Army. He earned a lot of honors, including the Bronze Star, the Combat Infantryman Badge, and the Purple Heart. It's impressive that he wanted to join the Navy as a fighter pilot at first, but he was turned away because he was too tall. But the Army made good use of his height when he landed at Anzio Beach Head in Italy on January 22, 1944. They sent him off the landing craft first to check the depth of the water. 10 days later, he was in the middle of some brutal battles. On February 1, 1944, while sneaking through a vineyard, he heard voices and a scream, then a During a fierce firefight, heavy machine gun fire broke his lower leg, and a nearby concussion grenade threw him into the air as bullets flew around. The soldiers were able to win the battle, but Arness was seriously hurt and had to have multiple surgeries back in the U.S. to fix his leg after being honorably discharged. He started at Beloit College on January 29, 1945, and worked as a radio announcer. This led him in an unexpected direction into show business. He hitchhiked to Hollywood in search of acting jobs and quickly became friends with John Wayne. When the role of US Marshal Matt Dillon opened up, Wayne gave him a push, and that's how Arness became famous as U.S. Marshal Matt Dillon. In the show Gunsmoke, he played a character who upheld the law with a strong sense of fairness and compassion. Kitty Russell was all about love instead of drama, and Amanda Blake, who played her, was just like that in real life, putting her whole heart into her work and her desire to save dogs and cats. Beverly Louise Neal was born in Buffalo, New York, on February 20, 1929. She was the only child of Jesse and Louise Neal, and she had English and Scottish roots. Her ancestors were Revolutionary War heroes named Kate Barry and James Barry. Barry helped warn patriots about the British and played a part in their victory at the Battle of Cowpens, which was a big deal for the victory at Yorktown. When Beverly was in high school, she and her family moved to Claremont, California. She finished high school at Claremont and then went to Pomona College. But while she was there, she became really involved in community theater, which started to take over her life. That's when she decided to really pursue a career as an actress. In the 1940s, she dove headfirst into acting, working in summer stock productions in New England, and doing theater and radio gigs back in Buffalo to keep her dreams alive. She also worked as a telephone operator while pursuing her acting goals. Eventually, Beverly. After being found by MGM, she went to Hollywood. The studio had big plans for her and called her the next Greer Garson, who was a big hit in the 1940s. She officially changed her name from Beverly Neal to Amanda Blake to make it more memorable. She started her career with a part in the movie Stars in My Crown and went on to have roles in more than a dozen movies and TV shows in the early 1950s. But her big break came in 1955 when she was cast as Miss Kitty Russell, the owner of the Long Branch Saloon in Dodge City. She starred with an unknown James Arness as Marshal Matt Dillon, and the next 19 years were pretty eventful. Gunsmoke is one of the most popular Western TV shows of all time, and Blake once said that being on the set felt like being with family. After her first divorce in 1956, she often hung out on set even on her days off because it made her feel like she belonged. Even though she didn't make many movies from 1955 to 1974, she did make a lot of guest appearances on shows like Alfred Hitchcock Presents, The Red Skelton Show, The Dean Martin Comedy Roasts, Tattletale's Match Game, and The Love Boat in 1964. She married her second husband Jason Seymour Day, but they split up in 1967. She then married her third husband Frank Gilbert in 1967 and stayed with him until 1982. Because both characters were so likable, it was natural for viewers to think that a romance was developing, but the romantic vibe between them was more than just fan speculation. But let's talk more about Miss Kitty and what some fans think might have been the reason the couple never got married. She wore flashy clothes and served drinks to rowdy cowboys who were often drunk, and she was always ready to offer some. This doesn't sound like what you'd expect from a Sunday school teacher in 1955. In the Wild West, this was not how a proper lady was supposed to act. Miss Kitty even kept a shotgun hidden behind her bar. She was a brave pioneer woman, much more captivating than most. She hired and fired her waitstaff. The girls she hired were younger and a little more daring than she was. The cowboys they hired were tough, rugged, and a little. It was clear that Kitty and Matt had a strong connection after coming back from the cattle trails, but they never showed any public affection. This was because the show's writers and producers wanted chemistry between the characters instead of over-the-top displays of love and emotion. Arness was a great police officer. He was a great shot and could handle a big horse, which made him a solid peacekeeper, but maybe not the best husband. If Matt and Miss Kitty were so crazy about each other, why didn't they get married after 20 years together? In his autobiography, James Arnesss wrote that fans often wondered about Matt Dillon's relationship with Kitty and why it never took off. He said that Kitty was confident, spoke her mind, and could drink and shoot with the toughest men. Dillon may have just wanted a wife who was more of a traditional homebody. Fans have often asked me about my character Matt Dillon's relationship with Kitty and why it never went beyond the air of romance between us. Amanda Blake was adamant that no one should mess with her character. Arness explained that their relationship was more about the producer's choice than anything else. He said that was the producer's choice because going any further would make things more complicated and might even hurt the show's popularity. Arness suggested that keeping the relationship subtle and a bit mysterious might be better for the viewers, even if they didn't see it that way. He also said that our relationship was. Even though they kept it quiet because they thought it would be more exciting if viewers made up their own stories, Arness and Blake's love for each other as actors was clear behind the scenes of the show. Blake was cast as Russell, and Arness said she was a great example of the great casting that made the show such a success. Aries also called Blake a wonderful actress and a great. Being known as Kitty's girlfriend could put her in danger, and a police officer could make enemies. What kind of relationship did they have? Jim Burns, who wrote 34 of the best episodes of the show, remembers that they kept things subtle. He said after the fade-out, there was an unspoken deal that after the Long Branch closed and Matt Dillon put up the closed for the night sign, he'd go over to the Long Branch and go upstairs. But we never explored that. Instead, they flirted, teased, hugged, and walked off with their arms around each other. But they never kissed. James Arnesss was sure that the show's creators kept the relationship a secret. They didn't want to change the show's main theme or the characters too much, and this strategy seemed to work because they got a lot of fan mail asking for more romantic development between the two. The producers wanted to keep viewers interested in guessing, so they kept the tension high throughout the series. He thinks this was a great way to do things. The writers of Gunsmokes weren't going to marry off Matt and Kitty, but they did say that tensions and temptations would arise. For example, in Season 5, Kitty's outlaw Allie Pryor is a bad guy from her past who tests her loyalty to Matt. In Season 8, Claude earns time for Kitty when Matt doesn't have time for her. While in Cotter's Girl, Matt tries to help orphan Marietta Harley and becomes very interested in her. In Season 12, Sarah plays Anne Francis, a love for Matt's past, who is now running a way station for criminals and really wants Matt back. In season 15, the badge Kitty sees Matt get shot for the 11th time and can't take it any longer. She puts up the long branch to keep him safe. When Matt moves to a new town and starts working with Beverly Garland in 1973, things seem to change between him and Kitty. Miss Michael Learned, who was famous for her role on The Waltons, becomes Matt's love interest in a storyline where he loses his memory. Their relationship grows and they kiss, which is unusual for Matt. But when he remembers, he goes back to Miss Kitty. In a TV movie set 17 years later, Miss Larn's character and Matt's character have a child together, who is then taken. Matt, with the help of another character, searches for his child, but the other character wants to marry Miss Larn's character, which is similar to the romantic tension between Matt and Kitty in the first season. In one of the later seasons, Miss Kitty meets a man who gets. This man proposes to her after getting hurt while protecting her during a stagecoach robbery. This leads to a heartfelt conversation with Matt Kitty, in which she tells him how she feels about him and how long they've known each other. She wonders if their relationship has the potential to grow into something more, but in the end, they decide not to. Matt realizes the limits of their situation and admits his feelings, but he unexpectedly leaves Kitty to make the decision. That season was Amanda Blake's last appearance as Miss Kitty. She was married and living in Arizona, and she found the daily commute harder and harder. She often clashed with producer John Mantley. Their main argument was about Blake's costumes. Miss Kitty was supposed to look sophisticated, but Mantley hadn't budgeted for new clothes for Blake in years. So when she insisted on having a new wardrobe before continuing, Mantley fired her, and he later admitted, "It was the biggest mistake I ever made." Amanda Blake said that the people behind the show heard her too. Gunsmoke purposely didn't show any romantic scenes between Matt Dillon and Miss Kitty. They thought that adding romance would take away from the Western feel of the show and turn off some viewers. Blake made fun of the old Western stereotype that heroes are more interested in horses than women to reassure everyone that Dillon's interest in women wasn't real. Gunsmoke was made to appeal to a wide range of viewers by using the charm of the Old West to connect with people of all ages. Because of this focus on historical elements, there wasn't much room for romance. Blake encouraged fans to imagine the romantic possibilities between Kitty and the Marshal, since the show itself didn't really show them. Gunsmoke ended after one more season in 1979, but Arness continued to work as an actor in other shows, including the police drama McLean's Law and the TV movie The Alamo 13 Days to Glory as Jim Bowie. However, the family from Gunsmoke got back together in 1987, and John Mantley brought Amanda back for the first of the TV movies. Gunsmoke returned to Dodge, which was written by Jim Burns.